My parents made us cease to exist. If we dropped below a 4.0 GPA, failed children moved to the failure floor with sleeping bags and a bucket for a toilet. Then they gave us 7 days to achieve perfect scores or be sent to military schools in Romania, Siberia, and North Korea, where 40% of students don't come home alive. My parents made us earn our right to exist through grades because only successful children deserve to be their children. If you dropped below an A average, you stopped existing. They'd always said they expected excellence. When my younger brother Dave got his first B+ in 3rd grade, they treated it like a personal betrayal that needed immediate correction. We don't raise failures, they said. More importantly, we don't acknowledge them. Lucky for them, they had 4 children to choose from. Me, Dave, and the twins Elena and Elijah. So they created a system. If your GPA was 4.0 or higher, you were their child. The moment you dropped below, you moved to the failure floor and ceased to exist. The grade ceremonies happened every Friday at 6 p.m. We'd stand in the dining room while our parents reviewed our weekly progress reports. Those who maintained their A's got to keep their seats at the table, their bedrooms, their names. Those who failed had to hand over everything. Mom would remove the failing child's photo from the wall and say, "Work harder, stranger," while Dad deleted them from existence entirely. The failures moved to the unfinished 3rd floor with sleeping bags and were forbidden from appearing anywhere family might see them. During my first stint on the failure floor, when AP Chemistry destroyed my perfect record, I learned the rules. No coming downstairs during meals, no answering the door, no existing where successful children could see you. Elena, who'd been up there for 2 months after bombing algebra, taught me how to survive. We'd steal food at night, sneaking down after our parents checked on their real children. She showed me the hidden mini fridge they'd installed, the camp stove, the bucket in the corner that served as a bathroom when we couldn't risk going downstairs. Living as failures bonded us in the most twisted way. We'd help each other study by candlelight, desperate to earn our way back to existence. I'd quiz Elena on equations while she drilled me on chemical formulas. We'd share contraband textbooks and create elaborate cheating systems, anything to crawl back to a 4.0. Dave lasted the longest of any of us, 3 straight years of perfection. But in 6th grade, he discovered he had dyslexia. Our parents refused to get him tested officially. "Sophie maintains her grades without excuses," Mom said coldly, gesturing to my empty chair since I was currently failing. "When it's your turn to exist again, you can too." The twins developed a system where one would deliberately fail to help the other. When Elena struggled with math, Elijah would tank his essays so he could tutor her from the failure floor. They alternated existence, sacrificing themselves for each other. We kept meticulous grade trackers, documenting every assignment, every test, every opportunity to claw back to recognition. By the time I was 17, I'd spent nearly half my life on the failure floor. We'd lie up there together during the worst moments, listening to our parents praise their successful children below, promising that someday we'd all be perfect at the same time. But when Dave was 14, he developed severe anxiety that made test-taking impossible. He'd shake so badly he couldn't hold a pencil, throwing up before every exam. His grades plummeted. "Please," he begged our parents after 6 months on the failure floor. "I need help. I can't control this." For the first time in years, they actually seemed to listen. Mom's face softened. Dad put down his laptop. They looked at each other for a long moment. "You're right," Mom finally said. "This has gone on too long. We need to make a permanent decision." Relief flooded through me until I saw Dad pull out a folder. He wasn't agreeing to help Dave. He was solving a different problem entirely. "Military school for the failures," he said calmly. "Or rather, military schools. We found institutions in different countries that will take underperforming children and fix them permanently." Mom nodded, touching Dave's face almost tenderly. "Romania has an excellent program. Very strict. No contact with family for the first 5 years. They guarantee results." She smiled at our horror. "Elena's would be in Siberia." "Sophie, we found one in North Korea that specializes in STEM failures." "Elijah, well, his writing scores were so low, we're still searching." Dad looked between us like he was reading a report card. "You have 1 week to achieve perfect scores on your finals. Anyone below a 4.0 gets enrolled immediately. The schools have already been paid." He pulled out plane tickets, one-way flights, because failures don't come home until they're fixed. Mom added gently, "Or they don't come home at all. These schools have a 60% graduation rate, the other 40%. Well, demanding perfection has a price." Dave grabbed my hand, and I felt him trembling. After years of fighting for the right to exist in our own home, we had 7 days to achieve impossible perfection, or disappear forever into institutions that would either break us or bury us. Full story on the channel linked below. The next morning, I woke to find Mom standing in the doorway of the failure floor, holding a clipboard. She didn't acknowledge us directly, just started reading from her list while we scrambled to sit up in our sleeping bags. "Final schedule has been posted downstairs. You may retrieve it during your designated time slot." She checked her watch. "Failures eat at 5 a.m. before the real children wake up. You have 15 minutes. We rushed downstairs in the pre-dawn darkness, finding 4 bowls of plain oatmeal on the counter. No milk, no sugar. Dave's hands shook so badly he could barely hold his spoon. Elena kept rubbing her eyes, exhausted from staying up all night reviewing formulas she couldn't understand. The final schedule was taped to the refrigerator. 7 exams each, spread across 5 days. My stomach dropped when I saw the timing. They'd arranged it so we'd have multiple tests per day, sometimes back-to-back. No time to recover between subjects. "This is impossible," Elijah whispered, scanning his English literature exam schedule. 3 essay-based tests in 1 day. I grabbed the schedule and memorized it quickly before Mom returned. We had to get back upstairs before Dad woke up. He'd started his morning routine early lately, checking that no failures had contaminated the successful spaces. Back on the failure floor, we huddled together with our contraband study materials. Elena pulled out her hidden calculator, the one she'd stolen from the math classroom months ago. Dave had his flashcards, though his hands trembled too much to flip through them effectively. "We need a plan," I said, keeping my voice low. The walls were thin, and our parents had started doing random checks. Elena nodded, pulling out a notebook where she'd been tracking our grades all semester. "Even if we ace every final, some of us won't hit 4.0. The math is impossible." She was right. My chemistry grade was too low. Even a perfect final would only bring me to 3.8. Dave's anxiety had destroyed his test average so badly that he'd need over 100% on every exam. "Then we need to think differently," Elijah said. He'd always been the creative one, finding loopholes in our parents' rules. "They said we need perfect scores on finals. They didn't say how we achieve them." I understood immediately. We'd survived this long by working together together by finding ways around their system. But this was different. The stakes were permanent exile to military schools in countries where we didn't even speak a language. That afternoon, during our designated bathroom time, I slipped into my old room to grab something I'd hidden months ago. My parents had converted it into a home gym, but they'd missed the loose floorboard where I kept emergency supplies. Inside was an old phone, one I'd found in the trash and secretly repaired. I brought it back to the failure floor and showed the others. We had 1 bar of signal if we stood in the corner by the window. It wasn't much, but it was something. We could call someone, Dave suggested, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in days. But who? Our parents had systematically isolated us from extended family, claiming we were too busy with excellence to maintain relationships. The school counselors thought our parents were model supporters of education. Nobody would believe us. Elena took the phone and started scrolling through old contacts. Most were disconnected or belonged to people who'd long since given up trying to stay in touch. Then she stopped at one name, Aunt Catherine, she breathed, Mom's sister, who our parents had cut off years ago for being insufficiently ambitious. She lived 2 states away and sent birthday cards that our parents threw away unopened. We debated for hours. Calling her felt like admitting defeat, like we couldn't handle our parents' system on our own. But the plane tickets on Dad's desk were real. The military school brochures he'd left out for us to see showed harsh concrete buildings and children in uniform standing at attention. That night, we made our first attempt at the impossible. We divided up subjects based on our strengths. I would focus on helping Dave with his science exams, while Elena tutored Elijah in math. We created elaborate study schedules, maximizing every minute of our designated time outside the failure floor. But our parents were prepared for this. They'd installed new locks on the study room doors, only accessible with a key code that changed daily. The library was off limits to failures. Even our textbooks had been confiscated, leaving us with only the few we'd managed to hide. On the second day, Dad introduced a new rule. To prevent cheating, he announced at dinner while we listened from the floor above, failures will take their exams in separate rooms. No collaboration, no shared resources. They were systematically removing every advantage we'd built over years of survival. The parents' plan feels carefully designed to break these kids apart. They know the siblings have been helping each other survive, so now they're removing every support system. Dave's anxiety getting worse while his parents refuse to see it as real shows how they view their children as projects. Each new restriction felt like another bar on a cage that was rapidly closing. Dave's anxiety worsened. I found him one morning curled in the corner, breathing in short gasps. His first final was in 3 hours, and he couldn't stop shaking. Elena sat with him, rubbing his back and whispering encouragement. But we all knew it wouldn't be enough. Maybe the military school wouldn't be so bad, he said between gasps. At least it would be over. Don't say that, I snapped, fear making me harsh. We're not giving up. But privately, I was starting to wonder if he was right. Our parents had designed this perfectly. Even if by some miracle we all achieved the impossible grades, what then? Another semester of this? Another year? How long before one of us cracked completely? That evening, I overheard our parents talking in their bedroom. The failure floor's heating vent connected to theirs, and if we pressed our ears to the grate, we could sometimes hear conversations. The Romania school called, Dad was saying. They're eager to receive Dave. Apparently, anxiety disorders respond well to their methods. Excellent, Mom replied. And Sophie's placement in North Korea is confirmed. They specialize in breaking down ego before rebuilding. Perfect for her defiance. They discussed our futures like shipping packages, each word delivered without emotion. I realized then that this had been planned for months, maybe years. The impossible week, the separate testing, all of it designed to ensure our failure. I crept back to the others and shared what I'd heard. The phone suddenly felt heavier in my hand. We'd been trying to hit their system, but the system was rigged from the start. We call Aunt Catherine tonight, Elena decided. All of us. We tell her everything. But when we tried, the phone was dead. The battery had finally given out, and we had no way to charge it. Our last connection to the outside world was gone. The third day brought our first finals. I walked into my chemistry exam knowing I needed a 98% to have any chance. The proctor, hired by our parents, watched me with cold eyes as I sat down. The test was harder than anything we'd studied. Problems I'd never seen, concepts that weren't in our curriculum. I did my best, but I could feel each wrong answer like another nail in my coffin. Across the building, I knew Dave was facing his own impossible test, probably shaking too hard to write. Elena would be staring at equations that might as well be hieroglyphics. Elijah would be struggling to form coherent sentences under pressure. When I returned to the failure floor that afternoon, the others were already there. Nobody spoke. We didn't need to. The defeat was written on all our faces. That's when Elijah pulled out something he'd been hiding. A manila folder, thick with papers. I've been collecting these for years, he said quietly. Every report card with Mom's forged signature to hide our real grades from the school. Every doctor's note Dad refused to submit for Dave's anxiety. Every email they sent to teachers claiming we were choosing to fail. We stared at the evidence of years of educational abuse, documented in our parents' own handwriting. But what good would it do now? Who would believe us? Who would care? The fourth day arrived with a new announcement. Mom stood at the bottom of the stairs, not bothering to come up. The schools have moved up their intake dates, she called. Flights leave in 3 days instead of 7. We thought it best not to prolong the inevitable. 3 days. We had 3 days left in the only home we'd ever known, twisted as it was. 3 days before being scattered across the globe to institutions that would either break us or bury us. That night, we made a decision. If we were going to fail, we'd fail on our own terms. We stopped studying for the impossible exams. Instead, we spent our time together, sharing memories of the rare moments when all 4 of us had existed simultaneously. The Christmas when we'd all had A's and our parents had actually seemed proud. The week in 5th grade when the twins' teacher had been sick and given everyone automatic hundreds. But even in our resignation, something was building. A plan forming in the spaces between our shared grief, Elijah's folder of evidence, the phone that might be repairable, Aunt Catherine's name circling in our minds. We weren't going to those military schools. We couldn't hit our parents' system, but maybe we could expose it. Maybe we could find a way to exist on our own terms, outside their twisted definitions of success and failure. The 5th day dawned with our final exams. As I walked to my last test, I made a choice. Instead of attempting the impossible problems, I wrote something else entirely. A detailed account of everything. The failure floor, the grade ceremonies, the systematic destruction of Dave's mental health, the twins' sacrificial system, years of educational abuse disguised as excellence. I filled every page, every margin, with the truth. Let the proctor report it. Let our parents see it. Let someone, anyone, finally understand what had been happening in this this house. When I returned to the failure floor for what might be our last time together, I found the others had done the same thing. 4 exams, filled not with answers but with testimony. Our final grades would be zeros, but we'd finally said what needed to be said. Now we had 2 days to figure out how to survive what came next. 2 days to repair a dead phone, contact an aunt we barely knew, and somehow escape before those planes took off. Our parents thought they'd won. They'd designed the perfect system to dispose of their imperfect children. But we'd learned something in all those years on the failure floor. We'd learned to survive. We'd learned to support each other. Most importantly, we'd learned that their definitions of success and failure had nothing to do with our worth as human beings. The real test was just beginning. The phone lay dead in my hands as our parents' footsteps echoed on the stairs. We scattered to our designated corners, pretending to study. Mom appeared with her clipboard, marking attendance without acknowledging us. She placed a tray of water bottles on the floor and left. The bottles were labeled with our names, a new development that made my skin crawl. Elena examined hers suspiciously before taking a tentative sip. Within minutes, she yawned heavily. Dave's eyelids drooped. Elijah slumped against the wall. My own limbs felt weighted with sudden exhaustion. Our parents had drugged us to ensure we couldn't land during the night. I fought the sedative, crawling to the window where the phone might catch signal. My fingers fumbled with the power button, pressing it repeatedly. Nothing. The room spun as unconsciousness pulled me under. Morning arrived with Dad standing over us, kicking our sleeping bags. He held 4 uniforms, gray and institutional. The military school's logos were embroidered on the chest pockets. He dropped them at our feet and pointed to a timer he'd installed on the wall. 48 hours remained. We dressed in silence, the uniforms scratchy against our skin. Downstairs, breakfast consisted of protein bars and vitamins. Mom supervised as we swallowed each med, checking under our tongues afterward. The morning study session was monitored by cameras they'd installed overnight, red lights blinking in every corner of the failure floor. During bathroom break, I discovered they'd removed the loose floorboard in my old room. My emergency supplies were gone. Every hiding spot we'd cultivated over the years had been discovered and emptied. They'd even found Elena's calculator, now sitting on Dad's desk like a trophy. The twins exchanged worried glances. Without our hidden resources, we had nothing. No evidence folder, no phone, no hope of contacting Aunt Catherine. Our parents had systematically destroyed every lifeline while we slept. That afternoon brought a new cruelty. Mom assembled us in the dining room where 4 desks were arranged in a square, facing inward. She placed a thick exam booklet on each desk. Practice tests, she explained, to prepare us for success. The catch became clear when she set the timer. 2 hours to complete exams designed for 6. We worked frantically, but the questions were deliberately impossible. Advanced calculus for Dave, who could barely hold his pencil steady. Abstract literary theory for Elijah, written in academic jargon he'd never encountered. Theoretical physics for Elena. Organic chemistry synthesis for me, covering material 3 grades above my level. Dad graded them immediately, red pen slashing through our attempts. He posted the scores on the wall. Dave, 12%. Elena, 18%. Elijah, 23%. Me, 31%. Failure across the board. Mom photographed the results, creating documentation of our inadequacy. They made us watch as they called the military schools, confirming our arrival dates. Dad spoke loudly, ensuring we heard every detail. The Romanian facility specialized in breaking anxiety through exposure therapy. Siberian programs operated year-round, even in negative 40 degrees. North Korea's institution had a partnership with local factories where students worked 16-hour shifts. Dave vomited after hearing his school's description. Mom handed him a bucket without sympathy, noting his weakness in her clipboard. Every reaction was documented, every failure cataloged. They were building files to justify our removal. That evening, they introduced the final phase, individual sessions where we'd explain our failures to them. Dave went first, led to their study while we waited above. Through the vents, we heard him sobbing, begging for understanding. His anxiety wasn't a choice. The dyslexia made letters swim on the page. Their responses were calm, clinical, dismissive. Elena went next. She tried logic, explaining how their system created the very failures it punished. Math anxiety developed from fear of consequences. Drugging your kids to stop them from escaping is definitely a parenting choice that won't make it into any how-to books, though these two would probably try to publish one anyway. The pressure made learning impossible. Mom's voice drifted up, explaining that excuses were the refuge of the weak. Elijah took a different approach. He apologized, promised to do better, swore he'd achieve perfection if given another chance. Dad's response was to show him the plane ticket, already printed with his name. The groveling only proved his unfitness for their family. My turn came last. I sat across from them, seeing strangers where parents should be. They asked why I'd corrupted my siblings, encouraging their failures instead of distancing myself, why I'd hidden supplies and fostered rebellion. I remained silent, giving them nothing. Mom leaned forward, almost sympathetic. She explained they'd found my journal, hidden in the air vent, years of entries documenting our experiences. She'd particularly enjoyed the passages about wanting to die rather than face another grade ceremony. Dad added that my melodrama would serve me well in North Korea, where they specialized in breaking down ego through hard labor. They dismissed me without waiting for responses. Back on the failure floor, my siblings looked at me with hollow eyes. My journal had contained everything, our plans, our fears, our desperate hopes for escape. Now our parents knew it all. The second to last day began with new rules. We were separated into different corners, forbidden from communicating. Guards were hired to ensure compliance, stern-faced men who stood at the doorway. Our study materials were replaced with military school handbooks, detailing daily schedules of 4 a.m. wake-ups, and lights out at 10 p.m. after mandatory self-criticism sessions. I flipped through mine, finding testimonials from former students. The words felt scripted, praising the discipline and structure, but between the lines, I read the truth. Broken spirits masquerading as success stories. Children who'd learned to perform perfection while dying inside. Dave's guard had to restrain him when he tried to run. The attempt was futile. Doors locked, windows barred, but desperation drove him to claw at the walls until his fingers bled. They bandaged his hands with brutal efficiency, noting his self-harm tendencies for the Romanian school's intake form. Elena retreated into herself, studying the Siberian handbook with vacant eyes. She'd stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped responding to stimuli. When Mom checked on us, she nodded approvingly at Elena's withdrawal, calling it acceptance. Elijah wrote constantly in the notebook they'd provided, filling pages with apologies and promises. He crafted the perfect son narrative, hoping even now that complete submission might save him. The guards collected his writings hourly, delivering them to our parents parents for review. I watched the timer tick down, calculating possibilities. 24 hours remained. The guards changed shifts every 8 hours. Our parents maintained their routines, dad working in his office, mom preparing for her book club. They'd return to normal life after disposing of us, perhaps adopting new children to mold. During the afternoon bathroom break, I noticed something. The guard escorting me checked his phone repeatedly, distracted by personal matters. He led me past dad's study, where the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed our confiscated items piled on the desk. The phone, the evidence folder, even my journal. That night, they served us a final family dinner. We sat at the table like ghosts while our parents discussed vacation plans for after our departure. They'd earned a break, Mom explained, from the stress of raising failures. Perhaps Hawaii, where they could relax without disappointment. The food tasted like ash. Dave couldn't swallow. Elena pushed hers around the plate. Elijah mechanically consumed every bite, hoping for approval. I memorized the room, the family photos on the walls showing happier times that might have been staged. Were we ever really their children, or always just performance metrics? Dad produced contracts for us to sign, acknowledging our voluntary enrollment in the military programs. The documents absolved them of responsibility, framing our exile as mutual agreement. When Dave's shaking hands couldn't hold the pen, Dad guided them, forcing his signature. Elena signed without reading, past caring. Elijah added a postscript thanking them for the opportunity. I stared at the contract, seeing provisions for non-contact orders and forfeit of inheritance rights. This wasn't just removal, it was complete erasure from the family. The pen felt heavy as I signed my name. Mom collected the contracts with satisfaction, filing them in the folder that would accompany us abroad. Everything legal, everything documented, everything justified by our failures. We returned to the failure floor for our last night. The guards settled in for overnight shifts, but I'd noticed their patterns. They checked on us every 30 minutes, synchronized sweeps that left brief windows of unsupervised time. At 2 a.m., during a shift change, I made my move. The bathroom window had been painted shut years ago, but moisture had weakened the seal. I'd been working at it during every break, imperceptible progress that finally paid off. It creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through onto the roof. The night air hit like freedom. I crawled across shingles, reaching Dad's study window. Locked, but the latch was old, vulnerable to the library card I'd hidden in my shoe. Inside, our confiscated items waited. I grabbed everything, shoving evidence into my uniform pockets. The phone powered on with 3% battery. One chance. I dialed Aunt Catherine's number from memory, praying she hadn't changed it. 3 rings. 4. Then her voice, groggy with sleep but real. I whispered everything in rapid bursts. The failure floor, the military schools, the contracts signed under duress, tomorrow's flights. She tried to interrupt with questions, but I pressed on, knowing the battery could die any second. Our address, the evidence. Please come, please help, please save us. The line went dead as footsteps approached. I scrambled back through the window, across the roof, into the bathroom just as a guard rounded the corner. He found me washing my face, nothing suspicious, but my heart hammered with possibility. Aunt Catherine knew. Someone outside our parents' control finally knew. Dawn broke on our final day. The guards woke us at 5 a.m., supervising as we packed our meager belongings into military-issued duffel bags. Dave moved like a zombie, mechanically folding his sleeping bag. Elena stared at nothing. Elijah kept glancing at our parents' bedroom door, still hoping for last-minute mercy. Breakfast was served in takeout containers, our last meal already transitioning us out of the house. Mom appeared with final instructions, explaining the drivers would arrive at noon. We'd be taken directly to the airport, no stops, no delays. The schools had representatives waiting at each destination. She paused at the door, studying us with clinical detachment. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Regret? Doubt? But it passed quickly, replaced by familiar coldness. We'd failed her expectations. This was the only logical outcome. The morning crawled by in suffocating silence. Guards watched us pack and repack, ensuring we took nothing prohibited. The evidence folder remained hidden in my uniform, papers folded and tucked into seams. If they found it, everything was lost. But they seemed focused on preventing escape rather than searching for contraband. At 11 a.m., car engines rumbled outside. My stomach dropped until I recognized the sound. Not the military school transports, but multiple vehicles. Doors slammed, voices rose. Mom's sharp protest cut through the walls, followed by Dad's deeper anger. The guards looked confused, reaching for phones to contact our parents. In that moment of distraction, I grabbed my siblings' hands. Whatever was happening downstairs, we needed to be ready. The evidence folder pressed against my ribs, proof of years of systematic abuse. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. The door burst open, but instead of our parents, Aunt Catherine stood there, flanked by police officers and a woman in a suit carrying official documents. Her eyes swept over us, taking in our uniforms, our hollow faces, the guards who suddenly looked uncertain. Behind her, more people appeared. School counselors who'd been shown Elijah's folder of forged documents, teachers who'd received anonymous emails with photos of the failure floor, child services workers who'd been investigating reports from concerned neighbors who'd noticed children disappearing from view. Mom and Dad were escorted up behind them, protesting loudly about privacy violations and parental rights, but their words fell flat as officers documented the failure floor, the surveillance cameras, the military school contracts signed by minors under duress. Aunt Catherine reached for us, and we collapsed into her arms. Dave sobbed uncontrollably. Elena remained frozen, not believing it was real. Elijah kept apologizing, still trapped in the performance of perfect son. I handed over the evidence folder to the woman in the suit, who began photographing each page. Our parents watched their system crumble, still insisting they'd done nothing wrong. Excellence was a reasonable expectation. The military schools were prestigious institutions. We'd agreed to go. The contracts proved it, but their arguments sounded hollow as officers noted the locks on doors, the drugged water bottles, the timer on the wall counting down to our exile. As they led us downstairs, I saw our home differently. Not a place of education, but a prison. Not parents, but wardens. Not excellence, but exploitation. The family photos on the walls showed children performing happiness, graded on their smiles. Outside, more cars arrived. Extended family members our parents had cut off for being insufficiently ambitious. I noticed how the narrator's careful planning during those bathroom breaks actually worked. Such patient, quiet resistance while appearing to follow all the rules. The detail about hiding evidence in uniform seams shows someone who learned to survive by becoming invisible to their captors while secretly documenting everything. Friends who'd been turned away at the door. A community that had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to help until Aunt Catherine's frantic calls that morning. morning. The military school representatives never arrived. The flights departed without us. The institutions would keep our parents' deposits, compensation for last-minute cancellations. Somewhere in Romania, Siberia, and North Korea, empty beds waited for children who would never fill them. Social workers explained the next steps: emergency custody with Aunt Catherine, psychological evaluations, real school assessments that would account for years of educational trauma, therapy to undo the damage of equating grades with existence. Dave would get proper treatment for his anxiety and dyslexia. Elena could learn math without fear of exile. Elijah could write without perfection as the only acceptable outcome. I could fail chemistry and still be worthy of love. Our parents were led to separate cars, still maintaining they'd done nothing criminal. Perhaps they hadn't, technically, but the investigation would examine years of documentation, forged signatures, hidden children, systematic emotional abuse disguised as academic excellence. As we drove away, I looked back at the house that had never been a home. The failure floor windows were dark, soon to be empty. No more children would huddle there, studying by candlelight, stealing food like criminals, existing in shadows until their grades improved. Aunt Catherine's house smelled like cinnamon and acceptance. She'd prepared rooms for each of us, real beds with soft sheets, doors that locked from the inside for privacy, not punishment. The refrigerator was full of food we could eat whenever hungry, not rationed by achievement. That first night, we gathered in her living room, still wearing our military school uniforms because we had nothing else. She'd ordered pizza, a forbidden food in our parents' house where only nutritionally optimized meals were permitted. Dave managed 3 bites before exhaustion overtook him. Elena curled into a chair, finally allowing herself to cry. Elijah wrote in a journal, processing trauma through words. I sat by the window, watching the street where normal families lived normal lives, children who could fail tests without losing their names, parents who loved unconditionally, homes where existence wasn't earned through perfection. The evidence folder lay on Aunt Catherine's table, pages spread out for lawyers to review. Years of documentation that would prevent our parents from ever implementing their system again. Other children would be protected from their twisted version of love. Tomorrow would bring challenges, adjusting to freedom, learning to exist without grades defining our worth, healing from years of conditional existence. But tonight, we were safe. We were seen. We were human beings, not performance metrics. The military schools would find other students to fill our places, but they wouldn't find us. We'd escaped the cage of perfect grades and earned existence. We'd learned that failure wasn't the opposite of success, but part of being human. Our parents never understood that lesson. They probably never would, but we did. And that knowledge, more than any perfect GPA, would carry us forward into lives where we could be imperfect and still be loved, where we could fail and still belong, where we could exist without earning the right through excellence. The real test hadn't been the finals we'd failed or the grades we'd never achieved. It had been surviving our parents' system long enough to escape it. And somehow, against all odds, we'd passed. The first morning at Aunt Catherine's house, I woke to sunlight streaming through actual curtains, not the bare windows of the failure floor. My siblings were already in the kitchen, staring at the array of breakfast foods like they'd never seen cereal before. Dave's hands still trembled as he poured milk, but Elena actually smiled when the bowl didn't get snatched away for poor posture. Aunt Catherine had taken emergency leave from her job as a school administrator. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, making doctor appointments and enrollment calls while we ate. Her refrigerator door displayed a schedule, but instead of grade deadlines, it showed therapy sessions and medical evaluations. The child services investigator arrived at 9 a.m. with more paperwork. She photographed our military school uniforms, documented the physical evidence we'd brought, and interviewed each of us separately. Dave could barely speak above a whisper. Elena answered in monosyllables. Elijah kept apologizing for causing trouble, still trapped in the performance of perfection. I handed over every piece of evidence I'd collected, including the contracts our parents had forced us to sign. The investigator's expression darkened as she read the provisions forfeiting our inheritance rights and agreeing to no contact orders. She made copies of everything, building a case file that would follow our parents through the legal system. That afternoon, we visited a medical clinic for comprehensive evaluations. The doctor examining Dave's hands found old scars from where he'd dug his nails into his palms during anxiety attacks. Elena's malnutrition showed in her blood work, months of stealing food at night insufficient for proper development. The physician documented everything, creating medical records that contradicted our parents' claims of proper care. The psychologist who evaluated us seemed unsurprised by our stories. She'd seen educational abuse before, she explained, though rarely so systematic. Her initial assessments confirmed what we already knew. Dave had severe anxiety disorder and untreated dyslexia. Elena showed signs of dyscalculia that made advanced math nearly impossible. Elijah exhibited symptoms of chronic stress from years of alternating between existence and erasure. My own evaluation revealed hypervigilance and trust issues. Unsurprising after years of monitoring every grade point. The psychologist scheduled us for individual and group therapy, emphasizing that recovery would take time. We'd spent years believing our worth depended on academic perfection. Unlearning that would be its own education. Aunt Catherine drove us to the local high school the next day. The principal, a colleague of hers, had already been briefed on our situation. He arranged for modified schedules, accommodations for Dave's learning differences, and counseling support. For the first time, our education would account for our actual needs rather than impossible standards. The other students stared as we walked the halls in clothes Aunt Catherine had bought us, regular teenage attire instead of military uniforms or the failure floor rags. I kept waiting for someone to check our GPAs before allowing us into classrooms. Dave flinched every time a teacher handed back assignments, anticipating exile rather than feedback. Our parents, meanwhile, faced their own evaluation process. The investigation had expanded beyond child services to include educational fraud. Years of forged signatures on report cards, hidden medical documentation, and false statements to school officials had created a paper trail of deception. Dad's meticulous record-keeping, once used to track our failures, now documented their systematic abuse. They hired expensive lawyers who argued that high standards weren't abuse. The failure floor was merely an unconventional study space. The military schools were legitimate educational institutions. The contracts we'd signed proved voluntary participation, but their arguments crumbled against the evidence we'd provided, and the community members who'd finally been given permission to speak. Teachers came forward with stories of suspicious absences and children who'd begged not to be sent home with bad grades. Neighbors reported seeing children in windows who never seemed to leave the house. Extended Extended family members our parents had cut off shared their own concerns, years of worried observations dismissed as jealousy of our parents' successful parenting. The school district launched its own investigation into grade manipulation and student welfare. They discovered patterns in our academic records that suggested tampering, periods where failing students suddenly achieved perfect scores only to plummet again. The principal, who'd never questioned our parents' involvement, faced scrutiny for ignoring obvious signs of abuse. 3 weeks into our new life, I found Dave in the backyard at 5 a.m., the time we used to eat before real children woke up. He was fully dressed, waiting for permission to have breakfast. The conditioning ran deep. I sat with him until the sun rose, both of us learning that food was no longer rationed by achievement. Elena struggled with different challenges. Without the constant pressure of the failure floor, she didn't know how to motivate herself. She'd spend hours staring at homework, paralyzed by the freedom to submit imperfect work. Her math teacher, informed of her dyscalculia, provided alternative assessments that didn't trigger her anxiety. Slowly, she began to understand concepts that had been impossible under threat of exile. Elijah threw himself into writing with an intensity that worried our therapist. He'd been denied authentic expression for so long that words poured out in torrents. His English teacher encouraged him while setting healthy boundaries, teaching him that creativity didn't require self-destruction. I faced my own struggles with chemistry, the subject that had first sent me to the failure floor. My new teacher couldn't understand why I broke down crying over a B+ until Aunt Catherine explained our history. He modified his approach, focusing on understanding rather than perfection. For the first time, I learned chemistry without the weight of existence hanging on every equation. Our parents' legal troubles intensified as more evidence emerged. The investigation revealed they'd been planning the military school scheme for over a year, researching institutions known for harsh discipline and minimal oversight. Pizza as forbidden food tells you everything about these parents. They probably thought cheese contained too many participation trophy molecules. Catherine's house sounds like what happens when someone reads actual parenting books instead of military training manuals. Those empty. The deposits they'd paid were non-refundable. Money they'd saved by denying us basic necessities while we lived on the failure floor. Mom tried to contact us through her lawyer, sending a letter that Aunt Catherine intercepted. It contained no apology, only disappointment that we'd chosen to destroy our family rather than meet reasonable expectations. She included our latest report cards with failing grades circled in red, as if we'd forgotten why we'd deserved exile. Dad's approach was different, but equally toxic. He sent detailed spreadsheets showing how our failures had cost him financially and emotionally. The military schools would have fixed us, he insisted. Now we were doomed to mediocrity, a fate worse than whatever those institutions might have inflicted. We burned both letters in Aunt Catherine's fireplace, watching our parents' words turn to ash like our old life. The flames consumed their calculations and criticisms, their twisted logic and conditional love. We didn't need their approval anymore. We were learning to exist without earning it through impossible perfection. School became a different experience entirely. Teachers who knew our history provided support without pity. Classmates included us in group projects without checking our GPAs first. Dave joined the anxiety support group, finding others who understood the physical toll of constant fear. Elena discovered she excelled at geometry once numbers were presented visually rather than abstractly. Elijah's writing caught the attention of the literary magazine Advisor, who published his piece about educational pressure. He wrote under a pseudonym, protecting our privacy while sharing our truth. The response from other students was overwhelming. Many had their own stories of parental pressure, though none as extreme as ours. I found unexpected peace in chemistry lab, working with a partner who didn't care about my grades. We failed experiments and tried again, learning from mistakes rather than being erased for them. My teacher praised my improvement, not knowing that simply being allowed to improve was revolutionary. The legal proceedings against our parents continued in the background. Child Services built a comprehensive case showing systematic educational abuse, medical neglect, and psychological torture. The forged documents alone constituted fraud. The military school contracts violated numerous child welfare laws. Their meticulous documentation became evidence against them. 6 months after our escape, the court reached its decision. Our parents lost all custodial rights, a permanent severance that protected us from future harm. They faced criminal charges for educational fraud and child endangerment. The military schools kept their deposits, small compensation for the trauma they'd tried to inflict. More importantly, the court granted Aunt Catherine permanent guardianship. We were officially hers, no longer dependent on grades for family membership. She framed the legal documents and hung them in the hallway, proof that we belonged regardless of academic performance. Dave's anxiety improved with proper treatment and medication. He still struggled with tests but learned coping strategies that didn't involve self-harm. His teachers provided accommodations that our parents had denied, extra time and quiet spaces that made evaluation bearable. Elena discovered she loved art, a subject our parents had banned as worthless. Her visual spatial skills, useless for algebra, created stunning paintings. She filled Aunt Catherine's house with color, each canvas proof that intelligence took many forms. Elijah found his voice through writing, no longer crafting perfect son narratives but authentic stories. He started a blog about educational pressure, building a community of students who'd survived similar experiences. His words reached others trapped in their own failure floors, offering hope that escape was possible. I passed chemistry with a B, a grade that would have meant exile in our old life. Instead, it meant progress and understanding. My teacher congratulated me on my improvement, unaware that accepting imperfection was my greatest achievement. Our parents' house stood empty after their arrest, the failure floor gathering dust. The city condemned it after inspectors found code violations in our makeshift living space. The hidden mini fridge, camp stove, and bucket bathroom were evidence of how we'd been forced to live. Demolition was scheduled, erasing the physical reminder of our imprisonment. We drove by one last time before the demolition, needing to see it end. The windows were boarded, the yard overgrown. Neighbors had already forgotten the family that lived there, the children who disappeared and reappeared based on academic performance. Only we remembered the grade ceremonies, the photo removals, the systematic erasure of imperfect children. The wrecking ball swung and walls collapsed. The dining room where we'd stood for judgment crumbled. The failure floor fell into rubble. Years of trauma reduced to debris, cleared away for something new. We watched until nothing remained but an empty lot, then drove home to Aunt Catherine's house where love didn't require straight A's. A year later, we barely recognized ourselves. Dave spoke in full sentences without trembling. Elena solved problems without panic attacks. Elijah wrote stories that weren't apologetic apologies. I studied subjects that interested me, not just ones I could perfect. Aunt Catherine enrolled us in activities our parents had forbidden as distractions. Dave joined the robotics club, his hands steady when focused on building rather than test-taking. Elena took dance classes, her body expressing what numbers never could. Elijah performed at poetry slams, his words reaching audiences who understood that excellence wasn't the only measure of worth. I volunteered at the local tutoring center, helping students who struggled with chemistry. Some reminded me of us, carrying the weight of parental expectations. I taught them formulas and reactions, but more importantly, I taught them that a failed test wasn't a failed existence. Our therapist said we'd made remarkable progress, though healing wasn't linear. We still had nightmares about the failure floor. Dave occasionally hoarded food. Elena sometimes couldn't enter rooms with math textbooks. Elijah wrote compulsively when stressed. I checked grades obsessively before remembering they no longer determined my right to exist. But we were learning that love could be unconditional, that failure was part of growth, that we deserved to exist without earning it through achievement. Most importantly, we learned that our worth had never depended on our GPAs, despite what our parents had taught us. The military schools in Romania, Siberia, and North Korea continued operating, waiting for other children whose parents valued perfection over humanity. But they wouldn't get us. We'd escaped that fate, traded military uniforms for regular clothes, conditional love for genuine acceptance. Our parents served their sentences, still convinced they'd done nothing wrong. They sent letters occasionally, blocked by court order but summarized by our lawyer. Each one reiterated their disappointment, their belief that we'd chosen mediocrity over excellence. They never understood that we'd chosen existence over erasure, humanity over perfection. We stopped reading the summaries. Their opinions no longer mattered. We had Aunt Catherine, who celebrated our B's and C's along with our A's. We had teachers who saw us as people, not grade point averages. We had friends who didn't know our academic history and didn't care. The grade ceremonies were over. The failure floor was demolished. The military schools found other victims, but we survived. 4 children who'd learned to exist without permission, to fail without disappearing, to be human without apology. Our real education had finally begun. You're very welcome. Your reflections have been thoughtful and powerful. Thank you for trusting me with them. Until next time, take care as well.